Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, this is Debate Sensei NFALD edition. This is where we discuss things relevant to competitive NFALD. I have with me two experts in the field and in the association, Dr. Justin Kirk from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and Chad Meadows, Director of Debate from Western Kentucky University. I was about to say Western Washington because I always say that. All right, Western Kentucky University. Thank you both for being here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, excellent. So this week, what we're talking about is tournament week preparation. And so just a little bit of clarification on what that means is that the tournament's coming up on the weekend, and so how are you switching gears? What are you doing that's different from any other type of preparation during that tournament week? All right, and so when you think tournament week preparation, Chad, when you think of that, what's like the first thing that pops to your mind? Something that you're like, all right, this is different.
I have a very defined schedule for the tournament week. So in my mind, you need to have a long-term assignment that's due the Tuesday before the tournament starts. So that should be kind of like done before the tournament week. In terms of like assigning those out, you should like do some assignments before the tournament week, and those should be due on Tuesday or Wednesday. The reason being is that you want to have time to process any new arguments that you may have cut in the weeks before said tournament, and integrate those into your files. And you want to, make that due in time to be able to have familiarity with that. I like Tuesday because it also increases the chance that you could do a practice debate that week that incorporates some of those new arguments, or a practice speech, or just in some way that you can like process and practice with some of those new materials the week of the tournament. Then I think that you need to do another assignment that's like a short-term assignment, and that's basically just like updating things that change a lot. So really those are uniqueness arguments. And you want that due like the Friday before the tournament starts. Or if it's like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday tournament, the Thursday before it starts. And that's basically like your politics updates. Like if you're super picky, you can include stuff like econ up, down, current, strong, weak, right? Like, and you want that stuff to be like kind of like new and current. And so those are, I think, like the two like assignment, like generative features that I like to have for the tournament week. A due date for a long-term assignment, and then a due date for a short-term assignment to be done before the tournament. And then the rest of the time, I like committing to kind of like organizing our arguments.
Okay. So, Justin, any overlap with you? Do you take a similar, different approach?
So I would say we have a similar approach to like when things are due, right? Like if you've got a shorter assignment, it better be in, by Friday before the tournament. I think longer term assignments, we have a little bit more flexibility on our squad because I think we have so many people with different schedules that like Tuesday doesn't always work out for everyone. But yeah, I mean, as far as like big assignments due early in the week so students have time to organize, process, integrate, that is very important. I would almost even say that like if it's not in by a Tuesday or Wednesday before a tournament, it shouldn't be getting run at the tournament because you're not going to have time to write blocks, highlight cards. Very few people on our coaching staff highlight cards. We underline them, but we want the students reading the evidence and highlighting it. And if you get a file on Friday night that's 40 pages long, you don't have time to read it and process it and think about it for the tournament that weekend.
Right.
So I think that's really important. The one thing I would add is that we will have kind of like a kind of middle area of like, they're not short, not long, but like case negatives or specific case assignments or things that we will assign on Monday night going into the tournament. So we'll look at the entry list on Monday night at our meeting and say, here are the top 10 teams that we need to have case negs for, see where we have what we have in the tubs to measure kind of where we're at with strategies and stuff, and then evaluate who needs the most work where do we can put our most resources for those case negs? And those tend to come in on like Thursdays or Fridays, like a little bit closer to the tournament, because neg strategies tend to be a little bit more plug and play. You walk into the round, you pull out the NC, you read it. Students don't need to read through 40 pages of evidence to kind of understand an NC strat. So I would say that's like the biggest difference, I think, from, or I guess add to what Chad said, is we add in some case neg work every week.
Okay.
Stuff like that.
Okay. So these longer, both of you have these longer term assignments. What are some examples of what an appropriate longer term assignment is, and how long is a long term assignment?
Yeah. I'll give you an example, because we've got one going on right now. One of the things we noticed at the beginning of the year is that all of our Prolif good cards are from 2014. So every card that we have in our file that says proliferation to North Korea or Iran is good is from a decade ago. And so that is a longer term project where take our proliferation good arguments, update them so that none of our cards are less than 3 or 4 years old, or more than 3 or 4 years old, get all the same arguments, same warrants, probably the same authors even, and rebuild this old impact turn file, update it, make it new, or something like a disad or a critique, something that requires a second level of argumentation that's not just a 3-card shell, but we need extensions, we need blocks, we need answers to key affirmative arguments. That would be a longer term project, because it doesn't just require the student to do an afternoon or an evening of research, but actually commit some time to organizing and producing a file that is usable by, I would say the difference is long-term projects should be usable by everyone on the team.
Oh, okay. That's a good
right. Like a long-term project, I should be able to show up my long-term project, give it to all the members of my team, and they can then integrate that, right? Whereas a shorter-term project may have limited. 1 or 2 debaters might use this in a debate. It might only apply to one argument. But the longer projects are the squad-sized projects, the ones that everybody's going to read or everybody should have access to during the tournament time.
Pretty much the same thing. Like Chad, you guys also share that. I know some teams where it's kind of like, well, I think everybody's got their own approach, but do you think that the long-term projects that you assign are more of like a communal position?
Yeah, I mean, on our team, and I imagine most teams, it's like a role that everything is shared with everyone. From what in my experience, that's more of like a high school thing, where like individual team, and that largely I think comes from very, very wide commitment levels between debaters on high school teams, where it's like you've got kids that are like, I'm in this class, I don't really want to do debate, and I will casually break the new affirmative of the like hardworking team that spent months of their life and this is their thing, like that. So yeah, it's exact same thing. Like big files, big assignments that are sort of like foundational pieces for the approach that you'll take to the season are like more long-term projects. And then we may assign some case negatives also for long-term projects if it's kind of like either the argument doesn't really fit into like any of our like more broad assignments, like the affirmative maybe is like unique and different, or like B, it's just like really good, and so like it needs like a more like thorough interrogation, and that could also be like just like a lot of like we did an NFU neg at some point where someone like took like weeks of time to like look at all the NFU arguments, because like that applies to like a ton of different teams. But also like we did like a mushrooms neg, because like that is such a unique affirmative approach that doesn't really like jive with most of the more general arguments that we've generated. And so like that requires like its own assignment. So yeah, we definitely do those case negs. I kind of like let students do a little bit more of their like own case negs and don't really assign them. And generally like me and the varsity folks will do one for the like less experienced folks, to kind of like help them out. But yeah, I think you've also like got to be spending time during the week looking at the AFs that are going to the tournament, the negs that are going to the tournament, and just like prepping answers to those arguments that don't require like a ton of time, but like do need just like some organization. So I would generally call that like organization. Like if you're not cutting more than like 50 pages of cards, then to me that's just kind of like a fun afternoon.
Okay. It seems like the lead up to the first tournament, the long-term projects would be affirmative focused. And then after that, while there might be updates and you might even devote time to like cutting a new affirmative, but that it's dominated by coming up with negative strategies to everything that you've collected at a tournament. Am I mistaken on that?
I would say broadly that is true. I would say our big projects for prior to the first tournament tend to be like impact files.
Right.
Hegemony good, hegemony bad, prolif good, prolif bad,
okay,
growth good, growth bad. Big solvency mechanisms. So like one of our big projects, NFU neg, was definitely like a big preseason. We knew people were going to be reading that affirmative, so there's no reason not to start on that research early. The more nuanced stuff is stuff that comes out after the first tournament, like the mushrooms negative that Chad was talking about. That is something that came out at the first weekend, and that everybody then had to kind of reset and say, oh, top 5 debaters reading this really weird AF. We all need to be on top of this really weird AF that one of the 5 best debaters in the country is reading. Because you all know that like they've done the work on it. And so you've got to go back to your squad and sit down and put in at least as much thinking into it as they have so that you can kind of figure out the best angle on it. And it's particularly frustrating when you're researching an AF and that key term in the AF isn't even something that Google says is a word.
Like, okay, so like
the example is this affirmative uses the term mycopolitics, which is not a term of art. It's an amalgamation of a couple of different words that the debate team has chosen to kind of create. So when you search for it on Google, it brings up geopolitics.
Right.
And some other stuff, but it doesn't get you anywhere near what you're looking for. So it's one of those apps that takes a lot of like digging, and you've got to go read some interviews with one of their main authors, Paul Stamets, and figure out what that dude's saying. And like, you just kind of have to get a little bit more involved with the literature. That is a couple weeks of work, and not just like an afternoon of like, this is this new Israel disad. That should take 5 minutes, right?
Right.
The smaller arguments, new advantages, new disads, that's an afternoon's worth of work, if that, you know.
Is there any type of preparation during the week that you'd consider to be counterproductive? Is there such thing as prepping too much, or is there like a cutoff? You're like, all right, we're not cutting any more cards after day or something like that.
Yeah. So I think that like I would echo what Justin mentioned about large new files that are just kind of like handed to students.
Okay.
Like with not enough time for the students to understand something.
Got it.
It actually comes from like a personal experience of mine. I had like a debate my sophomore, junior year of college. And back then we did Parlay. And so we had like the Parlay finals, and then like it was time for the LD finals. And for the LD finals, like I get there and it's like a brand new strategy, new critique. And it was like a Nietzsche critique. I had never read a single word of Nietzsche in my entire life. I had no idea what was going on. And like later I was like, oh yeah, like this argument made total sense. Like it was like an absolutely badass argument. I didn't understand what was going on in the debate because I was just handed something and I didn't understand it. So I think a lot of especially new coaches really need to watch out for how prepared you are for the debates is not the same as how prepared your students are for the debates. And you need to create like an infrastructure that enables students to get prepared for debates, not an infrastructure that like just you have cards that you can read, you know? And to an extent, like that's going to be inevitable, right? Like if students like aren't incredibly motivated, and which is fine, like debate's hard and not everyone can be super motivated every single week for every single tournament. There's going to be some times when like students are just reading crap they don't understand because like they're not that prepared for the tournament. But for your folks that are like, you know, like prepared, locked and loaded, ready to go, they need to understand what they're talking about. I think is the biggest thing that I would like say is like unproductive. I'm a big fan also of like not doing a bunch of extra work that you don't have to do. And so like when we talked about how like I think the beginning of the year focus on the AF, it's because you know you're going to be AF, right? Like, and so like you don't want to spin your wheels doing like a bunch of case negs and guesswork. You know, NFU makes a ton of sense. We also did NFU because like that's just obvious. But you know, you don't want to do a bunch of like stuff that just like sits in the tub. And so one thing I did in particular when I was a younger coach that I felt like was unproductive, I would just like pump out diss ads. Like on this topic, I probably would have pumped out 20 diss ads on this topic already. Right. Like one for like every like adversarial state, like a bunch of different, I mean, it would have been like 20 diss ads. No one understood any of those arguments, and they were just things that I cut. And then B, we would never read them, right? Like they would just sit in the tub for like months and months and months and never get read. And to me, it's like sometimes it's better to like, instead of writing a new diss ad, could you just like cut a specific link to the old diss ad that you have to the tournament, right? Like that's like a little less enjoyable, a little less fun than like cutting like a cool new diss ad. But that's going to be something, it's a lot easier to internalize for a student pre-round. Hey, that diss ad you've run 12 times? Well, there's a slightly different link explanation that we can explain in 10, 15 minutes because like we've done a spec link to this affirmative. So I would say like generating a bunch of new arguments that no one's going to understand or read pre-tournament is also something that I would suggest against.
Yeah. A couple other things that I think are pretty counterproductive during the prep week. I think if it's the week of a tournament, you should be done thinking about rounds that happened before that week. I have students who come in like the Thursday before a tournament. It's like, hey, can we review ballots from last week? And I'm like, no, I don't want to think about those rounds. Those rounds are over. You won or lost those debates in the past. The debates you have coming up are different opponents, different arguments, and different judges. And students keep getting like they will get hung up on old rounds for weeks at a time. And the faster you can get them like next tournament, next one up, the sooner they can flip that switch of like, once the round is over, the round is over. You don't have any more control over it. The things you can do, maybe there's some things at the margins those ballots suggest for you to like work on in practice. But focusing on like what I did wrong at the last tournament isn't going to be productive for this week's tournament.
Okay.
The other main thing I would say is a lot of undergraduate students really think and believe in their hearts that they can work till 4 a.m. and be productive and produce just as good work at 4 a.m. as they do at 10 o'clock in the morning. And the idea that you can stay up all night on Thursday night and all night on Friday night and be ready for 8 a.m. rounds on Saturday is just false. Like, get sleep. 8 hours of sleep is better than the 3 cards you're going to cut Friday night. I promise you. Because if you can't coherently explain the arguments because you're too tired or you're just like sleep warped, you're not going to win debates anyway. Right. And I think one of the things undergraduate students and are sometimes encouraged by their coaches to do is to like cram those last few days before a tournament, get everything done the last couple of nights. And I think one of the best practices is like, if you've got 30 minutes a night, do 30 minutes of work a night. Don't put all of it on Thursday. Don't put all of it on Friday. Find times in your schedule you can do a little bit here and a little bit there, and build from there. But don't leave it all for Thursday or Friday night. I've had students show up who are like, I got an hour of sleep last night. And I was like, well, I can't help you win debates today. Because like your brain is just not functioning in the way it should be with full rest and full nutrition.
All right.
Yeah, so, nothing aggravates me more than a cram session, which really like creates a lot of synergy between me and the current generation.
So that kind of goes into not so much just research and strategy, but mindset, right? And so sleep is important to that. Do you do anything else for mindset? Specifically, y'all get any like rituals leading up to the week or anything unique to your teams?
Not really.
No.
I'm not a ritual.
I think we try to like have a similar-ish schedule.
Right.
In terms of how we do things, which is why I do like the long-term assignments due this day, the short-term assignment is due this day. We'll generally arrive at the hotel at this time, right? Like, I mean, mostly it's just trying to create some predictability for their schedule, but no, we don't. I don't know that we have like a lot of like good rituals. I mean, I mean, we do like, I don't know, like warm-ups.
Okay.
Like vocal warm-ups.
But
just like spreading, not the cool speech ones, but like the I don't know, speed drills.
Well, how about practice rounds? Do you have more or less? Do you like? Is there a feel for not just the research end of it, but the actual getting up and running a full round on the team?
We probably have more the week of tournaments.
The week of.
I think that's more of a function of students motivation and or urgency level.
Right.
I would probably prefer to have more not the week of tournaments and less the week of tournaments. But I feel like it ends up being slightly more, but not like overwhelmingly or anything. Like, I mean, to me, I'm like practice rounds should just be kind of like changing your oil, right? Like you're going to progressively improve faster if during the periods between tournaments you're still doing debate. And so like those practice rounds can like help you improve a little bit, but I don't think like doing like a bunch of practice debates pre-tournament is going to really do a ton for you.
Right.
Especially like, I mean, in an evidence-based debate at the college level, a lot of what wins happens in the research. And what arguments you're prepared to like make. And so if someone was like, I could either do a practice round or I could like conceptualize and write out for 30 minutes every single day this week, like why my like affirmative turns disads or like why the disad turns, like write stuff out, right? Like that's gonna help you more the tournament than like doing an extra practice round.
So if you're like crunched for time and you're like, that one would be better. It would be better to sit down and actually think it out than to stand up and sort of role play.
I think so. And that is specific to, I would say, like policy debate and like a very more circuit style of like NFA-LD in particular, where like it is a little bit more about like the evidence that you're reading. Like in other debate formats, I might disagree, right? Like like IPDA, I think maybe like you might want to do, some practice rounds because like the bulk of what you're doing is just creating like a muscle memory. That's the same thing for like NFA-LD, but I think I just don't think doing a bunch of practice rounds pre-tournament is going to help you a lot.
Okay.
I think for us, it's very like dependent on what the student situation is vis-a-vis the arguments we have. We tend to get more practice rounds if there's no more new arguments in play coming up, right? So like this past weekend, one of our debaters was reading an AF they hadn't read all year. So we did a couple of practice rounds just so they could get their feet under them with the new AF. Like it's not like they couldn't have won their AF debates, but having a couple of debates under your belt is always better than not if it's a new argument. If we've got a new disad coming out, I encourage folks who are going to the tournament, hey, why don't you get a practice round in, or maybe even an NR redo on that disad, and this was going to be kind of my caveat. I tend to find the like pre-prepared NR practice or 2AR practice against predicted argument to be much better than a practice round. So like, for example, hey, you're debating an NFU AF this weekend. You want to read the sole purpose counterplan, the deterrence disad. Let's do a practice NR where I give you a 1AR document that you have to prepare against. You have 4 minutes of prep and then give the 1NR or give the NR. I think students get much more out of that practice because they're much more doing the work that needs to get done in rounds. And practicing that. Whereas a practice round, typically, it's our files versus our files. And our debaters don't know how to read other people's arguments as well. So like if it was going to be a productive practice round, almost always like I simulate the debate with them where like I pretend that I'm Chad's best debater and read files that Ray would have read, pretend I'm Ray for a round, and then they kind of debate me, but we don't really have a debate necessarily. It's more of a simulated, you're debating this person in this situation. Let's practice this NR so that they have some more targeted like situational practice. Because most of the time I would say at the point where you're doing situational practice, skills practice isn't going to be very useful for these students. It is much more about like thinking through different kind of sets of arguments and how they interact with one another.
So like the wiki, isn't the wiki available with all the like the evidence that was at probably a previous tournament? Like how helpful is that in this sort of role playing that you have to do?
It's pretty useful. Not only the wiki, but like we have a pretty large squad, so we collect all the speech documents that we get. I'm sure Chad does too.
Okay.
So the scouting that goes on just amongst the people who are debating and judging for us provides us a really, like I would say probably like 30 or 40% of all the documents read at a tournament we see at some point, which means I can say, hey, I want to practice a debate against Truman's top debater. Hey, I want to practice a debate against Chad's top debater. We'll either go to the wiki or go to our own kind of organized files from other teams that we've received during debates. But yeah, it is pretty useful because it's mostly, I mean, I would say that the teams we're practicing against anyway, North Texas, Truman, Wiki, they're all releasing stuff open source on the Wiki anyway, right? Yeah. So like we are all, the teams that are kind of competing on that circuit style NFA-LD debate are sharing the same kind of level of information so that we all kind of can have the same level of kind of practicability.
Yeah, I totally agree with Justin. And that's large. I mean, yeah, if it's like, if people are doing more than like one practice debate a week, I would be shocked.
Oh, really?
Like
Okay.
ever. And it's
Wow.
probably honestly usually like 0 full practice rounds, lots of simulated speeches.
Okay. Like for limited preparation, I mean, you remember, Chad, when you were doing MPDA, it's very different, right? It's like practice rounds are basically it because you have to adapt every round all the time, you know what I mean? And like on your feet and stuff. So that's an interesting sort of distinction. Now I'm wondering, like, you're preparing all these new cards, and obviously other teams are as well. Is there a strategy for how to do research and prep at the tournament to do really, really quick, rapid prep and maybe get something, you know, ready now that you're doing all this scouting, you know, you're round 4 or 5, maybe an out round, and you're like, oh, I know what they have this new stuff, this or that. Like, are like, is there a strategy for doing that, or do you just kind of like fly by the seat of your pants?
I suspect Chad's answer is going to be the same, but it's division of labor and people you can trust to cut cards.
Okay.
It's like you got to send people into other rooms and say, I trust you to cut 2 cards and say this, go, you know?
Oh.
Yeah, and I think like you have to have those conversations with your team and like as a squad, like pre-tournament. And generally people are like not like, at least on my team, have not been like jerks about it. Like some people like basically it's like you need to like be at a certain level where like we can trust you to say like, oh, like someone broke a new F, do a case snag. And like some people are like better at doing other things. Like maybe they like will time a speech or like maybe like, and like I think there's no like task that's too low. Like when I was a freshman, like I mostly just like got people water and like made sure that like they were like comfortable because like I was not in a place where the arguments that I generated were going to be like particularly helpful to anyone in like a deep elim debate. In terms of like at tournament prep, so the first thing that I would like think of is just like accumulation of information. For the most part, like, you know, like I think there's always this like vision of like, oh, the big teams are like getting mountains of like cards together at the tournament and creating brand new files. I would say like outside of like maybe NFA, where like there's literally like 2 rounds a day, so there's nothing else to really do. At most tournaments, right? Like no one's doing that. Like I mean, maybe a little bit, but like for the most part, it's like the judges are judging in their rounds. The students are competing. There's like maybe 20 minutes between rounds. You're done at like 10 o'clock. You got to eat, get back to the hotel, and maybe you've got an hour, right? Okay. Like, and for the most part, I think you just want to know to the extent possible what was done and read at the tournament so you can calibrate what you do have and position it in the best place possible. And in some places, you just got to you got to like accept that like we're not going to be able to attack this AF or this neg from like every best angle, but you got to figure out an angle and then some complementary pieces around that angle, and then you got to go for it, right? In those debates, I would say like depending on where you're at, like you may also want to think about what if you like hit the same person like multiple times in a row? Do you like want to adapt your strategy based on the information you got in the previous round? So like, you know, how a team explains their argument is different from what you'll see on the wiki. And so like, I don't think there's any replacement for watching how someone debates their AF, right? And so like, to the extent possible, you can also get information about like how they're spinning the AF. You can also, I think, adapt your argument on the fly. But I would say information gathering is the most important thing you can be doing.
When it comes to information gathering, it's like the competitors are one thing, right? They're supposed to be getting this information, but if you're judging somebody else, I guess that's also could be partly scouting for them. Is there like any sort of unwritten rules about like, well, I didn't hit that team from wiki, but Chad judged me in the last round and he saw my AF and now they know. Like, do you take that into account?
Oh, absolutely. If Chad
yeah.
judges us round 1 and we broke a new AF, I know for certain Chad has seen it and sent it to the person who's researched. Like, it's kind of an unspoken word that if like someone's judging that round, they're going to send their docs to the person that could best use them to leverage them at the tournament, right? And so like part of it is when you're at NFA Nationals and you've got, like Chad had 4 or 5 judges and we had 4 or 5 judges, every single one of those people, in addition to all your debaters, is sending you documents throughout the tournament. So it almost becomes a logistics problem more than it does like an argument problem of like, how do I organize all this info coming in and sort it in a way so my debaters have the information they need when they need it? I.e., if Sac State broke a new AF in round 4 and we're debating them round 5 and they're AF again, the debater who's debating them better have the documents from that debate in their hands with 10 minutes to prep so that they can read the intel that we have. And if you don't have a system that can sort what you're getting, figure out what you have and how that works for the next debate, it's going to get really difficult because you can't actually provide the information you need in a useful way that's going to help you win that debate.
Yeah, you can tell pretty quick which teams are organized and which teams aren't.
Okay.
Because sometimes I'll be like shocked. I'm like, wait, like we broke that AF in front of like that team's assistant coach, and then by round 6 they still had nothing to say.
Okay.
Clearly this team doesn't talk to each other.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you can tell the teams that like have really efficient communication systems, and it's like, oh yep, by the next round like there's something together, like the team is like obviously like done something to like prepare for that debate.
It's a fascinating dynamic, the difference between the limited prep and the single topic debate associations. Like there's the interesting little nuances, and this is absolutely one of them. Thanks y'all for let me in on a little bit about how like preparation is different, not just between these two associations, but in the lead up to tournament week. All right.
Absolutely. And thank you for having us. I'm sure Chad and I like to hear about how each other's coaching practices.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a lot of fun for me too.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll be back in the future talking more about NFA LD stuff. Thank you very much.